Sarah, it's absolutely gorgeous to meet you.
It's lovely to
Finally,
meet you too. Yes.
I've heard all about you and read all about you, and here we are having a chat.
Yeah.
Um, there are so many things I want to ask you. I probably could talk to you for a week or two, but we've only
I'm
got
sure.
we've got a limited amount of time. So let's just start off by telling us how you got to where you've got to.
Sure. The long and short of it was when I finished my training and really throughout my training in graduate school and into my early professional singing career, I pretty consistently got feedback from teachers, directors, coaches that like your breathing isn't quite right. I was singing at a really high level. I knew I was a very good singer, but I would get that feedback, and yet no one could tell me exactly what was it or what to do about it. And so I sort of set out on my own path to figure out my own what was going on for me. And then as I got into my teaching career, I began to see that what was going on with me wasn't as unique as I maybe thought that it was, that almost everybody had some version of what I had experienced. It just expressed itself differently in their body. And that really set me on a path of just um, rabbit holing in the happiest way for me about the body. And I have two master's degrees. One was in vocal pedagogy, and I studied extensively the vocal mechanism. I took half of my classes were in the speech and hearing department, so it was really a heavily science based, and I really liked. I've always been curious about the body, so I kind of took what I knew of the singing mechanism and the singing body, and thought, well, what about the rest of the body? There's more than just the larynx and the lungs going on here. What else is there? And I've spent the last 20 years studying and applying and adapting all of those aspects into what I now do with singers.
And what do you do with singers?
um, let's see. That's a good thing to have to try and sum up, right? Um, I work with them to really get them in their body. That, as we talked about before we started recording this, um, there are layers of muscle and connective tissue in the body. And at the deepest layer is what I would refer to as the deep core system. And it spans from your pelvic floor up to your glottis. And that system in most bodies, due to all kinds of factors, but emotional, physical, we sit a lot, we don't use our bodies as much. Um, it isn't well integrated. And so the work that I do is really about getting that system talking to parts of the body, talking to each other, if you will, and getting it integrated so that there is a strong foundation that's not strong in the way of rigid, but supple and responsive and reflexive to the inputs that it's getting from the demands of the singing voice, from the demands of breathing, from the demands of just moving through your world every day.
Fascinating. Really, really fascinating. Because I'm constantly going between the physical world, the absolute anatomy books and knowing what
Hmm.
attaches to what and what, all of that, which is really what I grew up on,
Yep.
and a more metaphorical world, the world of the body mind in a more philosophical way, and how
Hmm.
they're the same thing really. And it's our understanding of our own bodies, isn't it? It's our own perceptions. That's all we've got.
Right.
Is what it feels like.
Yeah. I think I found in my training, the pedagogy books had very strong two-dimensional images. And I learned a lot about how things should function. But then when I had a three-dimensional body in front of me, it never matched up with what I had seen in those books. And I was like, what do I do with this real live three-dimensional body whose whose body is not just, it's not just about the function. Where is the emotion coming in and impacting things? Where is the lived experiences that we have, where we've all experienced trauma of different kinds? How is that impacting? What's the nervous system doing? And there are so many layers. And at least for me, I think we talk a lot in the voice world about being embodied singers. And 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 for me, and I think the people who are attracted to my work, the best and maybe only way to get embodied is through movement and slowing down and developing that awareness. Can you feel your heartbeat? Can you feel air against your skin? Very simple things like that. And then into bigger movements. And then how do you take that on to the stage? How do you bring that into a piece of music? It's all very intertwined, and it's all contained in this one amazing living instrument.
So with your awareness of the body from your academic knowledge, but also from your practical knowledge and your own experience, and all of your work as a yoga practitioner,
Mhm.
when you have a student in the room, do you work in a completely integrated way, doing some movement work, some breathing work, some yoga work, some voicing, some what are you feeling? What do you ever ask back about their history and
Sure. People usually when they work with me, they have to fill out sort of a questionnaire. I would say I don't tend to have I don't do much of the sort of weekly voice lesson type of work at this point. People are coming to me because they have a very specific issue going on that they think might be impacting their singing, and or you know they're experiencing something that might not require a physical therapist, but they haven't moved and they know that movement might help them in some way. So they'll fill out a bit of a questionnaire. And then I have them actually submit a couple of videos to me so that I can see them breathe in a particular position and move their spine in a particular way. So I get a little bit of a picture before I meet with them. And then they tell me what they want to work on, right? I think that that's really important that because I might see something and think, oh, we should do that. But if they're coming to me and saying, well, I have this hip pain, but I'm thinking, well, I see something in your shoulder, right? We have to address that issue first. So a lot of times, um, what I have them do is bring to their session the section of a piece of music that's troubling them. And then we put together what I've seen in the way that they move and breathe, and I have them sing. And then we move a little bit. And then we sing again. And we sort of look at just that one little section, right? Because it's too much to try and do a whole song, but we'll do a couple of phrases. And we go back and forth between moving, singing, and often there's a lot of silence for them to, it's very tempting as a teacher to want to jump in and say, well, this is what I see, this is what, and you want, part of teaching is encouraging them to have that experience for themselves. So eliciting feedback from them. What are you feeling here? What's changing? What's different? And sometimes, we what we were looking for as the person having the experience, not the teacher, but the student, is we want it changed. We want it fixed. And sometimes the first step is actually more awareness of what's going on. So I always consider that a huge success if we end the session and they're like, well, actually now I can really feel what's going on. So we move between movement, breathing, singing, and I would say that's the closest thing I could ever give you to any kind of formula, because every session is very unique to each person.
yeah, it's going to be reactive, responsive,
Yeah.
iterative. I mean, I have the same when people say, "What's your intake questionnaire?" And I say, "Well, I don't actually have one, and I don't
Mm,
go through any kind of formula, but one question leads you to the next, and as long as you've
yeah.
covered certain basic important areas,
Yeah.
it's a pathway
Hmm.
that fits that singer."
Yeah. I think if you're present as the practitioner, then you can be aware and responsive to them. And that really means letting go of your own agenda. You just cannot have one.
Ooh, letting go of self. You have to be aware of self in order to be able to let go of it.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
that's a lifetime in itself, isn't it?
Oh, for sure. An ongoing practice in all parts of one's life.
Yes. Yeah. 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 So tell me about this, the core. Tell me about this. Is it a philosophical concept or is it a physical thing or is it a bit of both?
I think of it as a bit of both. I find the avenue into working with people, it goes a little more smoothly if we do the physical aspect of it. Um, when I'm thinking about the deep core system, I'm thinking about the pelvic floor. And so the relationship between all these parts, the pelvic floor, the abdominal musculature, particularly the deepest layers of the abdomen, the psoas, the transverse abdominis, the multifidi muscles, which run along the spine and the back, the diaphragm, and then all the way up into the throat. That there's this relationship, and you can think of the throat, the actual physical diaphragm, and the pelvic floor all as diaphragms in the sense that they're working to regulate pressure in the body. And so when they work well together, we are regulating pressure well. And of course, one way of thinking about voice production is that we're it's airflow. We're regulating pressure at the level of the larynx, and if we do that well, the voice is often more easily produced. So when we have that deepest layer sort of well integrated, everything's working well together, and there's a great relationship between the rib cage and the pelvis in particular. And really, it's this the axial skeleton is what we're thinking of. Then the appendicular, the arms and legs and head are playing a role, but sort of down the line from there. So we have that physical element. For me, I'm also always taking into consideration that when we experience any kind of a trauma in our lives, we do. I studied with a woman named Jane Clapp in Canada, Movement for Trauma, and she used the phrase armoring up. And the first place that we armor up is the diaphragm. And we experience this at low levels, I think, when even when we're just nervous for a performance, right? Our breathing is the first thing that changes. And so often, if someone is in a heightened state, we have to address that armoring up before we can get to the physical practice. Because for many of us, if you go straight to the place where the problem is, you're going to crash and burn on what you're trying to do. So I will often use some sort of, um, I call them like backdoor entries of nervous system regulation that the person doesn't really necessarily know that that's why we're doing it. But if I perceive that there's would be some benefit from that, we'll do that first. And then the body, the physical body becomes more accessible to us.
And going in through that, the physical body is easier sometimes for the singer to accept and adjust to because you're not going in and asking them about trauma. You're not going in
Right.
and you know getting things that are going to be perhaps difficult and personal and
Right.
not
And
appropriate.
inappropriate, right?
Yeah.
We're not psychologists, we're not therapists. So for me it's just an intelligent approach to assume that everyone has a lived experience that has brought something into their physical body that we can work in a way that we just sort of honor that that is likely present and move on from there. And it doesn't require them. I mean, there are many, many, many times where the physical work that we do will result in an emotional response. And I always leave room for that. Not, I'm not going to ask questions. You don't have to divulge anything. I don't want to know most of the time because it's not appropriate, right? I don't have that kind of relationship with my clients. Um, but it's very much present, and I think it's just a smart way to begin.
It's interesting how that emotional response is often one of relief. I mean, I notice when students
Hmm.
cry in a
Hmm.
lesson, which is quite common, just
Yep.
for something, and it's nearly always when things have suddenly felt easier,
Hmm.
or when they've been able to do something they haven't been able to do. It's that relief
Hmm.
crying. It's not crying because you've made them feel sad.
Right, right. Yeah, something has been let go of in the system.
Yeah.
Occasionally I will know a bit about someone's background when they come in, but that doesn't mean that I know that when we get their diaphragm to let go, that's going to cause the physical response to things. I just think it's just all part and parcel of being present and aware and responsive to what is right in front of you. I think that is the biggest superpower that voice teachers need to have above and beyond any kind of knowledge about the singing instrument is the ability to be present.
So here's a direct question. Put you on the
Yes.
spot, Sarah. Um, when you're working with muscle relationships, muscle groups,
Hmm.
is it more useful to work on activating, or is it more useful to work on releasing?
I'll give you a very indirect answer and say it depends. um, I think that I think there's a lot out there in the world that suggests that the holy grail is the release of tension, right? That we hear that because we know we all have tension, but we wouldn't be upright if we
And
didn't. It's necessary to move through the world.
yeah, you can't release everything or you'd fall over.
Right. We just
Yeah.
wouldn't exist. And so for me, I have on the other side of the room a biotensegrity structure.
Uh-huh.
Um, And so I like that model. I use a skeleton a lot, but a skeleton looks like there's bone touching bone all over the place. Whereas the biotensegrity model, when you move one of the rubber bands, one of the rods also moves with it. So it's the whole system. So I do think from the standpoint of if we think about how the nervous system is impacting the state of our body in terms of muscle tension and activation and whatnot, I think it is worthwhile spending a little bit of time getting getting aware of your tension. Like using a pose like constructive rest, where you lie on your back with your knees bent, feet flat on the floor, and you just scan over your body so that you feel it. And that process of feeling often is enough to lower the tension levels so that then you can, let's say you wanted to raise one leg up into the air and feel activation in the deep core when you do that. You then, if you've sort of done that work, let's say 10 minutes in constructive rest, and then you move your leg, you might be able to feel that when you move your leg, your deep core, the place that you'd like to sort of transfer the load and have it absorbed throughout the body, isn't doing the work because your neck and shoulders are gripping. And so then you might be able to think, every time I go up and down the stairs and I'm picking my leg up to move, am I gripping with my neck and shoulders? And so I often ask people to have a conversation with themselves. Can you say, okay, neck and shoulders, you don't need to do quite so much work. Go ahead, you can release, stay released, stay released, and get a sense of what softness feels like. And then try the move again. And can you stay soft here so that you can move your leg? And then all of a sudden they're like, oh, I feel my deep core in a way that I didn't before. So I think they kind of have to go hand in hand almost. But I would say most people, I haven't met a human alive who couldn't stand to do a little bit of release work and feel a little better afterwards. The problem is it can't end there, right? That's not the end game. Just because you've had a massage or you've worked on relaxing your shoulders and your neck, it doesn't resolve why that was happening in the first place. And that's where the movement part comes in. We need to build new patterns of function and strength so that these can stay more quiet all the time.
So it is relearning,
Hmm.
relearning habits. And I mean, our physical habits, presumably they start from birth,
Mm-hmm.
and we're responding to the world around us and picking up
Sure.
on what our immediate caregivers are doing with their bodies and echoing things.
Yeah.
and
And then we go to
caring.
school, we go to school from, let's say ages 5 to 18 when you're growing into your adult body and you are growing in the shape of a chair because that's what you're sitting in all day at school, right? So we have all of these things, as you said, from we learn our gait patterns from the people who are caregiving for us, who we're looking at. It's the same way that we acquire speech from our caregivers, and we have all of that, and the reality is you also don't have to undo everything that has ever happened to you. You don't have to get rid of all of your quote unquote bad patterns. You're not something that needs fixing. It's
Mm.
just it's a change of conversation with your body and subtle shifts that can make really powerful differences. I don't think I don't think it's possible to be a human and not have some compensatory patterns in your body. That's just who we are. You may have had, like, I had a water skiing accident as a child that changed my shoulder. That isn't going to change in my body, but I can still learn to move in ways that are more efficient and effective because I dealt with a fair amount of neck tension my entire singing career that stemmed from that incident, yet it didn't stop me from being able to do what I wanted to do.
And this is very common in, well, I say every human is
Hmm.
has had some kind of physical experience, impact, breaks, sprains,
Sure.
falls. And part of this conversation is also about self-compassion,
Mm,
isn't it? That
yeah.
instead of hating the bit that hurts and getting frustrated with the bit that gives you problems,
Yeah.
to accept it
Yeah.
and
Well,
integrate it. And
I think again, we live in this world where we've had culture and religion and philosophy all separate mind and body,
yep,
right? And so we tend
Descartes has a
to,
lot to answer for, doesn't he?
yeah, exactly, exactly. We have a we most of us move through the world relatively disembodied, and then you can layer on all the different experiences that someone has had due to the shape, the color, the race, all of these other experiences are impacting how we are living in our bodies. And so the the as you said, there's a level of self-compassion to recognize, like, what I'm doing is really challenging, because in a sense, the work that I'm doing and asking people to do is bucking against the centuries of conditioning that culture has put together for us.
So when you're working with somebody
Mhm.
over a period of time and really helping them to get an awareness of their body and making small adjustments and shifting patterns,
Mhm.
presumably that also shifts patterns in their thought process, in their belief systems,
Mhm.
in their sense of self. Their So we're not just talking about body mind, we're talking about body, mind, and soul.
Yes, absolutely. I think that you can't change one without it impacting the other. I don't think that that's possible. I would say that isn't, it's another thing that I don't necessarily dive into with them, but sometimes it does come up, as a topic of conversation, that maybe I've worked with a fair number of people who are approaching the end of their degree and they've got a recital coming, and they're nervous about it. And and through this process of getting, sort of, I call it coming home to your body, like getting more embodied and living in their instrument, I personally don't think we ever want nerves to fully go away because it's part of what fuels us for a performance when used appropriately. But it's like their relationship to those nerves changes. Their thinking about the performance changes. And so they take the stage in a very different way than they would had they not done that embodiment work.
And this applies to all performers, doesn't it? I'm thinking about instrumentalists, I'm thinking about
Hmm.
dancers, I'm thinking anybody who's up on stage
Yeah. Yeah.
doing that creative or recreative
Yeah.
thing.
Absolutely. I think, it's something that I wish there's a performing arts high school here in my town, Walnut Hill, the Walnut Hill School, and I teach a movement for singers class there. And I I know that they don't, it's teenagers kind of live in a new house. They're like the hermit crab that has just moved into a new shell, and it's
Yeah.
all very new and different. And I like to think that what I'm doing there is laying a foundation for them that might, when they're in their late 20s and 30s, really start to make sense. But I want to plant the seeds for them of being in their body in a way that for the rest of us who were, 27, 28, 30, sometimes it's someone in their 60s coming to see me, that they're just getting to that then. I think if this could be a part of the vocal curriculum or for any, instrumentalists as well, anyone early on, the dividends would pay off tremendously later in life.
Mm. Mm. Well, for any human, I
Oh,
think
for
it's
sure.
probably going to help with health and well-being
Hmm.
throughout.
Yeah.
I remember years ago being um, aware that dancers, people who trained as dancers, had a great, possibly greater awareness of their bodies and what
Hmm.
and moving parts independently. Now I'm finding that dancers are in just as many holding patterns
Yeah.
as everybody else. There's just different belief systems in the body.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that. And it's been interesting as my own daughter is a dancer to watch her
Mm.
move through that process. I've always found that people who come to me with a background, particularly in ballet, they've been taught very specific postures as being appropriate, right? And I actually would love to throw the word posture out of the singing lexicon,
Oh,
just be
yes, yes. Along with
um,
support, please. Yeah.
yes, yes, just because we're never totally still on stage. So you can get yourself into a perfect posture and then what? I used to do a workshop on alignment and posture, and I would have them, I collected a list of the most common postural directives. And I would have people stand and do that thing with their body. And then I'd be like, now move and keep all of those things there. And you look ridiculous, like you're trying to move around the room. It's just not possible. But I think the same thing is happening for in the dance world where they need to have an easier time moving, let's say, the arms into whatever position they need to do. When that deep core system is integrated, you have so much greater control. But you have the same people, the same children, say, going into dance who are having the same basically sedentary experience. And so then they're hearing, okay, I need to have my core activated. And what they do is they just grip there. This
Yep.
is what I have seen this in my daughter and worked on it with her, that the idea of the core being responsive to what's coming to it is very different than a core that is just gripped and engaged and hard. And when that grip is there, it's much harder to move with a sense of fluidity and ease. And I do think there are, because I did some investigating just due to what was going on in my own family. There are some more progressive dance people out there who are talking about this and doing this kind of work to really get dancers in the same situation. Because I have found, you may have had a different experience, but people coming to singing from a dance background, particularly ballet, have had a very hard time, particularly with breathing if they're moving into classical singing, and and letting go of the patterns that have been so deeply ingrained over years and years and years of dance training.
And also the whole culture of perfection
Oh,
and
yes.
all of how it or they're always striving for the unachievable.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And that perfection that is said to be beauty or form or whatever, that is the same with singing. people
Yeah, it
striving
is.
for perfection and
Yeah.
allowing people to be a bit messy and a bit ugly and a bit quirky and to fall over a bit.
Right. And that's what we connect with as an audience. It's not the perfect high C or the perfect belted D, or it's that you can see yourself in the performance. And I mean, who isn't a little messy as a human being? I mean, I want to feel like I am emotionally moved, and I'm not emotionally moved by perfect technical expression personally. Maybe there are people out there who are, but I'm not one of them. I would refer to myself as the queen of good enough. I really strive to not be a perfectionist.
Has that been a difficult thing for you?
I don't think so. Growing up, I took an art class with my mother, a watercolor class, and she would sit down and make everything just perfect in her paintings. And I was like slapping color on there. It was impressionistic at best. And I was completely happy with it. It never occurred to me to try to be, I'm sure there are places in my life where I have been more perfectionist than others, because I don't know that any of us fully escape it. But I'm a quilter, and I don't worry if my lines don't match up perfectly. It just isn't, to me, it's just not where I can put my energy.
I wonder how much of it is to do with how we portray ourselves to the world.
Mm,
And I'm quite happy to be a bit messy in a lot of aspects of my life, but the
hmm.
ones that are on show,
Sure.
I'm a bit more picky about. So,
Yeah, right. I think especially in this world where we are, the world of social media and everywhere else, when it's your business. But I'll be honest and say the things that people respond to the most that I do are the things where I show my humanity. I made a ridiculous reel once of the giant mess. The space that I work in is a shared family space and my son had Legos all over the floor. And so I made a reel of it was an, oh my God, I have a workshop in 15 minutes and I better shove all this stuff out of the way. And people just, they loved that. People want to feel like my life is like your life. My body is like your body. It's, there's no, I'm very open in my teaching about the limitations that my physical body has, because that's my reality. I don't claim to be able to do it all or have the perfect system, because I don't think that serves anyone.
no, no. That's a very important framework, I think, and philosophy.
Hmm.
That good enough,
Yeah, yeah,
um, good enough, and good enough to do what I want to do with it. Because we're all getting older. We're getting,
yeah.
you know, more.
Yes, we are.
I'm beginning to feel it a bit. Um,
There's a
as a
certain liberation though, I find, with
yeah,
being middle-aged. I'll turn 50 this year, and I think I've hit a point where I'm like, world, this is me. You aren't getting anything but me out of this situation. And
yeah.
I don't know that I would have, if I were trying to do this work when I was 25, I don't know that I would have been able to have that attitude as much.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Having lived a fair bit and realised, and it's what's important and what isn't. I mean,
Yeah.
silly things like my daughters just did a half marathon last weekend, and we were comparing times, and I said, I did my personal best actually probably when I was 52, and I know I'll never do run that fast again.
Hmm.
I mean, I could if I really, really spent a lot of time training, but I can't be bothered to do that.
Yeah.
So that's fine. I've done that, and
Hmm.
I'm still running and having fun, and I will never be as fast as I was. So that's okay.
Hmm. Yep.
It's I do other things.
Yeah. It's acceptance of what is, and letting go of fighting against it, because there's just, time is too precious to linger in the past.
Yeah. Yes. So embodiment, embodiment, feeling. Can we kind of rewind a little bit to the nervous
Hmm.
system?
Hmm.
Uh, I'm very interested in the relationship between the nervous system and our health,
Mm.
and looking at things like immune health
Hmm.
and I mean the gut. There's so many connections. You can't separate things out. But
Yep.
we do know that there's a very strong link between our overall immune health and our resilience
Hmm.
and the nervous system, which is related to our breathing and is related to our movement and our awareness of our body. And what would you like to say about that, Sarah?
You know, I would say, I agree, and it's been a place of real fascination for me. Um, it came about partly due to my own lived experience, and then partly everyone that I saw, I began to wonder what's happened in their lives that has created, I worked with a singer who could not find any expansion in her rib cage, and she was singing at a very high level, early music, hired and traveling, and she came to me saying, I feel like I'm faking it because I actually can't move here. And my sense was that there was something more than physical going on. And again, I think because we tend to be, use the example of a crying child who's told, stop crying, calm down, rather than saying, what are you feeling? Where do you feel it in your body? What's what's happening? And not just shutting down that connection and that emotion, but actually diving into it and saying, what's happening? That, I think we could use the last, I don't know how many years into the pandemic are we now? Three, year three, where most of us have had an experience where maybe we sort of lived here at this level and we were punctuated with moments of stress, and then we could come back down from them, right? That's the sign of a healthy nervous system. We're not going to have stress, but when we have stress, it's going to take us up. We're going to flip our lid, as Dan Siegel says, be dysregulated, and then we have the ability to come back down and be regulated again. But I would say in the pandemic, we've gone to here punctuated with much greater moments of stress, and we flip our lid, and over time, I consider myself to be a really well resourced human. I work consistently at it, and yet I have found myself at moments being like, I'm out. I'm done. I don't have any more resilience for this. um, so I think it's another, the the resilience that's needed to be a performer, even just enduring constant rejection when you're perfectly well qualified for what you have just auditioned for, but you don't get the part. Like, there are levels of resilience that you need in all parts of your life. And i think I know it's imperfect, but I don't think we have a better system. I like Stephen Porges's polyvagal theory for thinking about regulation of the nervous system, that we have sort of the parasympathetic, and then we can be, where it's ventral vagal, and then we can see sort of be in collapse and be in dorsal vagal, or we can be up here in activated sympathetic nervous system. And so, and to know that you could have both collapse and activation going on in different parts of the body. And so figuring out, the hierarchy of, let's say you just like you're in total resign, and so knowing that you need to create an element of safety in the body and then move your body, and then you can get back to ventral vagal, parasympathetic, rest, digest, everything's okay. um, I like that model. It works for me. If I'm stressed out or worked up and someone comes to me and says, just take a deep breath, I probably want to slug them. I just, that is not going to work for me. I'm someone that, even in a, I've been to yoga classes, I've been to master classes, I've worked with people who are like, let's begin with breathing. I cannot. My body is not one that can just sit down and do breath work. I must move first. And I spent a lot of years feeling like, well, this makes me feel worse. And I've discovered that a lot of people benefit from that too. And it's that addressing the nervous system, again, as I talked about before, that idea of having just an intelligent approach, address the nervous system first so that you can find regulation and then do some, breathing if that's what you want to do or something else. But yeah, I think I kind of feel like we're in the very beginning stages of understanding all of these interconnections that we now know stress and inflammation underlie so many illnesses. So we have that, but I don't know that the Western medical world is yet really able to integrate that into what they're doing, um, partly because they're very part focused and broken down and not looking at the whole.
That's the trouble, isn't it? It gets you get specialisms where you
Right.
just drill down into your specialism, and it's so important to know about your thing in so much detail,
Hmm.
but there has to be context.
Right. Right. And I think we miss that a lot. And I think that's part of what I have tried to bring to the voice world is to get out of the box, get out of the vocal pedagogy box and say, well, wait, there's this whole other part of the instrument that matters. And because of, we haven't even talked really much about fascia, but because fascia is running throughout your system, if we took it out of you, we'd have a 3D replica of you that, and we know that there's connection between fascia from the sole of your feet all the way up to your skull. You could have something going on with your foot. I love having singers roll their feet on a ball and then sing, and they're like, why is that so much easier? I'm like, well, because we just worked on one end of the system that's pulling on something. um,
Oh yes, the times when
so
I've had plantar fasciitis
mm,
from running, I've always had a sore neck and jaw
yeah, right,
at the same time.
yeah, because it's pulling from one end.
Yeah, the whole thing gets tight,
Hmm.
and and what got me better was just being gentle, being having a bit of compassion, and not
Hmm.
struggling and fighting, and just allowing it
Yeah.
a bit of extension
Yeah.
and letting go. I've noticed actually during our conversation, Sarah, that I keep going, just
I love it.
breathing out, just letting go. Yes,
Yeah.
and that's my regulating
Hmm.
and releasing.
Right. And I think that's something too that, it's wrapped up in this idea of being present when we're teaching, understanding that we co-regulate with people around us. So if
Mm.
you, and it doesn't mean that you don't have anything difficult going on in your life or you've been able to like put it away in a box and think it doesn't exist. It's just that you have allowed for it and you've connected into your own system enough that if someone brings in their stuff and they're agitated, you don't rise up to meet them, right? You're able to say, I can sense you, I can sense me, I can sense you, I can sense me. And if you can stay in that regulated place, which it's very easy to describe, it is much more challenging to do, but that person will then begin to mirror your state more than you mirroring theirs. It's like parenting when you have a child who's all ramped up, and we've all had moments where we get sucked into their energy and we meet their energy and then it's a catastrophe. Whereas if you
Yep.
are in a place where you can stay regulated, the whole system goes much better.
Yeah, that time when you need to hand the screaming baby over to somebody else.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, do you consciously use your own physical state, your own breathing patterns, your own? I mean, even the tone of voice that you use in a lesson. Do you consciously adjust it to shift the student, or is it a subconscious?
I would say again, it depends. Someone who is, if my system, like I think this is a superpower that a lot of voice teachers have, my system is very responsive to others. So if someone comes in and my body says, ooh, they are revved up, I will probably make some conscious choices in terms of my own breathing, my own speech. But a lot of times, I think what I do is more sort of pre-work before I meet with someone. I have some things that I might run through for myself, to get myself, just somatically aware and grounded and oriented, so that I can just bring myself and then they just respond to me.
Have you done this sort of integrated body work with non-singers?
Yeah, I have. I have a few family and friends who, will reach out and say, could you help me with this? Because it is, I mean, what I do applies to anyone. It just so happens that my career path was already in the music world. I have a really, I have a real penchant for moms, people who have given birth and are, you're forever postpartum and you are
Mm,
forever dealing with, um, the demands of the world on you, and your body has been forever changed if you have gone through birth of any kind, whether it was a vaginal birth or a cesarean birth. So, for a long time in our town, pre-pandemic, I actually taught a weekly class designed for mothers that draws on the same concepts of the deep core system and, reintegrating everything, and having an in-person community, because I think we heal better in groups rather than doing the work individually. So it what I do applies to anyone. It's just that most of the
mm.
time I'm in the voice world doing the work.
And that, of course, links in with other gynecological issues that people are dealing with,
Hmm.
which will affect voices on a physical level and, I mean, the hormonal level, as well
Yep.
as an emotional level, that I think we don't understand very
Oh,
much yet,
absolutely.
about, polycystic ovary syndrome or endometriosis or any of those, which are hugely individual anyway. One person's experience of that syndrome is different from another person's, and
Hmm.
how it impacts their voice and their self and their breathing
Yeah.
pattern
Yep.
and their movement patterns.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a place where I feel like, again, we are beginning to scratch the surface of talking about those things. And I think there will probably never be enough funding for people to run large scale studies that can give us really good data on things in the voice world. So it's very incumbent on us as teachers, I think, to really work with the individual in front of us and believe them when they tell us my voice changes at this time and it's changing this way, and work with what's there in front of us. Because there are any number of issues that can occur, in the years where one is menstruating, and then it's a whole other kettle of fish as you move through the perimenopausal, 10 years potentially of perimenopausal, and then the postmenopausal life and what's going to happen there when it's like the second puberty, right? Where estrogen has lowered to the point where your brain is remodeling and all these other things are happening in your body. And we know the impact of estrogen on muscle function is pretty profound.
So, I mean, I would have thought that the impact of the hormone shifting is very noticeable in the I'm losing the losing the language. It must be hormones
It's a menopausal moment.
in the covering of the vocal folds and the mucus, that those
Yeah,
sort of things, which are very much impacted. I hadn't really thought about the muscle mass so much as well, the muscle
sure. And
function.
I think, pliability of muscle is impacted. I think lots of women will report in later menopause, um, that you have a lot more aches and pains in your bodies. and sometimes a full year of like, why does this hurt? And often I think when they get to the other side of menopause, that doesn't continue. But I think that the same changes in our muscular system that are happening, of course, there's vocal muscle too. And we also know, right, the same type of cellular lining in the vaginal canal is very similar to the throat. And so those, it makes total sense, right? We know that even something like childbirth, you'll hear a breathiness in a woman's voice as the pelvic floor has been taxed through childbirth. And as the pelvic floor regains tone, often the voice regains its ability to phonate. So those changes are part and parcel throughout the life of someone who has an estrogen dominant voice and a vagina happening in their body.
Mm. And then what about older singers? Do you work much with singers in their 60s, 70s, 80s?
I have. I would say that currently I don't as much, partly because what they're looking to do with their voices often isn't as demanding as someone who's seeking to have a full-blown stage career.
Right.
Um, but often, what I have found is I'll go in to do a workshop with a choir group that has a number of older singers in it, and there's it's never too late to start moving your body, and the benefits there are almost more about the rest of their life, that to have the balance to be able to stand on stage and maintain, just the integrity of their structure such that they have the stamina that they want. um, the demands are just different, I guess.
And confidence.
Mm,
Confidence to use their bodies
yeah,
when they
yeah,
feel like they're getting weaker or less reliable or less predictable.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
it's
that's
learning.
huge.
Yeah. I mean, we're told things like, when you're cleaning your teeth, stand on one leg while you're doing it, and, and then stand on the other leg. And, just those sort of simple challenges for the
Yeah,
body.
yeah, yeah, the feet, I think of the feet as being a big one, partly because our balance is happening due to your eyes, your ears, and your feet. So as hearing changes and as eyesight changes, having strong feet is really important. That's going to be a big part of staying on your feet, as you get older.
Amazing. Amazing. Gosh, there is so much we could explore further. So I'm going to put together a wish list for next time.
That would be wonderful. I would love it.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for your time today.
Oh,
Um,
it's my pleasure.
Now, the people listening to this are going to want to find out more about you. How can they find out about you and where?
Sure. So they can find my website is just sarahwhitten.com. And I'm on Instagram as the Vocal Yogi. Just Vocal Yogi is me. And I have a business page on Facebook, Sarah Whitten Voice and Movement. And they can check those things out. I'm pretty active on socials. They could join my mailing list. I have a class series that's just starting that really looks at that deep core connection, where we begin actually on March 7th. Um, for that, I don't know when this will come out, if this will be out in time for that, but that I teach those on an ongoing basis, and there are lots of ways that people can dive in and learn a little bit more about what I do. I think it's good to get a flavor of how someone works before you have to make any kind of a long-term investment in it. But I have a YouTube channel, the Vocal Yogi. People can find me pretty much anywhere.
And this work, I'm assuming that you find that it's easy to work online.
Yeah, it is surprisingly easy. Pre-pandemic, I was all in person and live, and then once the pandemic hit, there were a number of European organizations that were needing to offer things to their singers. And so I switched to a much more online based um, situation. And for me, I still love the energy of in person. I'm a very social, extroverted creature, so that's very rewarding for me. But I've never found it a problem to do the work online.
So our listeners from around the world can connect with you
Yeah,
and work
absolutely.
with you. That would be wonderful for them. So thank you very, very much. And I look forward to our next conversation together.
Yes, as do I. Thank you so much for having me on.
We hope you liked this video. If you did, please subscribe and share. It helps us get a much wider reach.